I can't believe that my life went to hell in just 4 years. It was 4 years ago that my wife went to work at Gilbert Endeavors. Both of our kids had become teens and Sarah was anxious to get out of the house. An entry-level secretarial job seemed perfect at the time. My name is Skip Trexler. My actual name is Austin, but I have always been called Skip. I was what people would call wiry. All my life I have been on the lean side and a bit peaked. My parents tried their best to beef me up, but nothing seemed to work. Finally, when I was in my early teens, they just gave up and decided to accept me as I was. It was a hell of a relief. I was average in height and still under 140 pounds when I graduated high school. Now, a lot of the thinner guys that I went to school with were active in track and field or on the swimming team. Some of them were great cross-country runners. Unfortunately, I had no interest in any sports, especially competitive ones. The closest that I got to anything of a physical nature was shooting. Not trap or skeet, but long-distance shooting. In order to do this, it required me to get outside and included quite a bit of hiking and climbing. Of course, I was not talking about target shooting, but varmint hunting. I took to it with a passion. All through high school and college, I spent most of my non-academic time either shooting or reloading. After 8 years, I was able to consistently hit a 2-inch target at 100 yards. My weapon of choice was a Marlin 336C cambered for the .219 zipper. That cartridge had been out of production for many years, but I still made my own out of 30 to 30 shells necked down. Being good at something like this gave me a sense of pride in accomplishment which I desperately needed. 2 important things happened. While I was in college, I met my wife, Sarah, and I met my future business partner, Chuck Fuller. Other than that, it was a bit boring. I got my degree in geology, got married, and started a small surveying business with Chuck. Life was good. Chuck and I never worked for anyone else. After college, we each put up $2,500 and started our own little surveying company. We concentrated on small jobs and a lot of real estate sales transactions. We didn't make any big money, but we were both comfortable and happy. Chuck married a local girl 3 months after Sarah and I got married. We stood up for each other. My family had a cabin, which we called a bungalow in Schuylkill County on 160 acres. We had all of our family gatherings there, and this was where I did most of my shooting when I was younger. The Fullers had a real cabin on 640 acres in Potter County. Chuck and his family did their hunting there, but did not use it for anything else. That is all you need to know for now. As I previously said, my life started going to hell about 4 years ago. Gilbert Endeavors designed and manufactured exercise equipment. Its headquarters was local, but it had manufacturing plants and distribution facilities all over the country. My wife Sarah started working there when our twin daughters, Marcy and Mercy, started middle school. It seemed to be a good idea at first. The hours were good, the pay was fair, and the location was convenient. The first year or so was perfect. Gilbert Endeavors hired Terry Ulrich, a retired NFL fullback, to be the company's marketing manager and official spokesman. Unfortunately, my wife worked in the marketing department. For 6 months, we were inundated with tales of the magnificent Terry Ulrich. My wife and daughters both were infatuated with his greatness. Thankfully, after about 6 months, all of the adoration seemed to taper off, at about the same time that Sarah started putting in lots of overtime. Chuck and I both grew up in the area, so we knew many people who worked at Gilbert. It was not difficult at all to find out that Sarah and Terry Ulrich had become an item. While their relationship blossomed, our marriage deteriorated. As Sarah and I grew apart, my relationships with my daughters did also. I never confronted her about it. She started going on more and more business and promotional trips. When she came home, she was always gushing about what she did, who she met, and what she saw. Of course, this was all for the girls' benefit. None of it was directed towards me. I had become a non-entity. She usually, but not always, invited me to accompany her to the company parties and gatherings where I was then ignored for the rest of the evening. Sex was out of the question. How does a man endure a life like this? Up until Sarah started work, our family life was normal. We got to eat out regularly. We took family trips on the weekends and vacations at least once a year. The girls took ballet lessons and played soccer. Sarah was active in the PTA and the Girl Scouts. We had a pizza night every week. The one thing that the girls did not like was spending time at the bungalow. All of this was in the past. It was all gone now. Sarah's out-of-town conferences and meetings gradually increased in the last few years. Lately, on several of the longer trips, she would take the girls with her. I was never invited or even asked if I wanted to go. I often overheard the girls talking to their friends about the great times they had. Nothing was ever said when they knew I was in earshot. Terry Ulrich was never mentioned, even though I knew he was on every one of the jaunts. Everything came to a head at the Gilbert New Year's Eve party. It was difficult for Sarah to not invite me. I didn't want to go. The humiliation of having to live with infidelity in private was bad enough. I was afraid that I would not be able to control myself if things got out of hand. I was right. The girls were all dressed to the nines. Marcy and Mercy were excited because it was their first dress-up adult party. I didn't have a tux, so just wore the best suit that I had. I did get to wear a tie that I had gotten for last Father's Day. Several hundred people were milling around when we arrived. Skip Trexler. Glad to see you could make it. Thanks for bringing your wife and beautiful daughters to our little gathering. Terry Ulrich seemed to be smiling at the grimace on my face as he crushed my hand. He finally let go, and I noticed Sarah was smirking. The girls gave me a disgusted look as they quickly wandered off. It was the start of a bad evening. I had one beer and crawled into a corner, trying not to embarrass my wife and daughters any more than I had. I had not said or done one thing, and yet I successfully ruined the start of their evening. Terry Ulrich was a big guy, really big. He was at least a foot taller than I was and outweighed me by 100 pounds, all muscle. He was the epitome of glad hand and grandstand. My daughters mingled all around the room, but my wife spent most of the evening by his side. Most of the time she was lightly holding on to his arm. A few of the lower-level men made feeble attempts to strike up conversations with me, but none of them went anywhere. Several of the middle-level and higher-level executives noticed me and smirked or made sly comments to their companions that I felt were related to my cuckold status. I didn't hear any actual words, but it was apparent what was going on. My beer was replaced with a plain ginger ale, which I sipped slowly as I worked myself into a bit of a frenzy. I normally was able to control myself pretty well and was proud of the fact that I never lost my temper. Many of the people had started dancing, and I noticed that the girls were having a good time, and my wife was also with Ulrich, of course. In the last 3 hours she, nor the girls, had spoken to me one time. Of course, I couldn't expect them to ruin a good evening by consorting with a wet blanket. A small male-female mixed group was off to the side of the dance floor chatting when one of the guys pointed to Sarah and Ulrich. They looked over my way, started laughing, and quickly looked away when they saw me glaring at them. They were still snickering a few minutes later. That ended my evening. I put my glass down, and as I started for the door, I noticed that Ulrich had his hands on my wife's ass, and she was caressing the back of his neck. Before I knew it, she had pulled his head down and gave him a big sloppy kiss right in the middle of the dance floor. It took me less than 5 seconds to get across the room, spin Ulrich around, and hit him as hard as I could with a roundhouse right. My hand hurt like hell, and the next thing I remembered was waking up in the back of an EMT vehicle. It was only a short ride to the emergency clinic, and I did notice that I was alone in the ambulance. I remember being wheeled into the emergency room. The next thing I knew, I was waking up in some sort of recovery area. 30 minutes after recovering, I got a visit from a doctor who gave me an update on my condition. In addition to my broken hand, I had 3 cracked ribs, a broken nose, 3 lost teeth, and 2 that were loose. My jaw was wired shut, and my right kidney was bruised. Ulrich ended up with a good kick to the testicles, resulting in some damaged blood vessels. The doctor said that I could be released in about 4 days, but I would have to spend at least 2 weeks in rehab. If I wanted to, they could arrange for me to have the rehab at home. I selected the other option. It was well after noon when my wife and daughters finally showed up. Sarah looked pissed off and the girls looked bored. No one said anything. Since my jaw was wired up, I didn't feel like starting any sort of conversation. I was able to speak, but I didn't want her to know that. Well, Skip, what do you have to say for yourself? I quickly evaluated her attitude and decided that this was a conversation that I did not want to have. Rather than try to answer her, I just mumbled and pointed to my jaw. We must have sat there for a good minute before she started again. It was embarrassing, Skip. The girls were so humiliated that we had to leave before New Year's Eve. The whole evening was ruined, and for what? I should have known better than to take you out in public. I guarantee that nothing like this will happen again. She had no idea how right she was. I just sat and looked at her. I couldn't even manage a smile, so I did nothing. They stayed a few more minutes. Since I did not respond in any manner, they finally just got up to leave. On the way out, Marcy paused and looked over her shoulder. "Thanks for nothing, Dad." Chuck showed up a couple of hours later. We chatted for a few minutes. Yes, I could talk, and then he pulled out the local newspaper. I made the front page. Local NFL hero protects wife and daughters from abusive father. The attached story went on to explain how I attacked my wife while she was dancing at the Gilbert Endeavor's annual New Year's Eve party. Terry Ulrich rushed in and subdued me until officials could take me away. Not exactly how I remembered it, but that's the story that people will believe. Chuck and I talked for a couple of hours and discussed a few options. After he left, I opted out of supper and requested a sleeping pill. I needed a nice long rest. I spent most of the next day being tested, probed, and poked. All the damages had been detected and acted upon. All I had to do now was wait and heal. One of the hospital staff gave me a list of recommended rehab facilities in the area. I selected one just outside of Hamburg. Chuck showed up later that evening. I sold him my share of the company for $2,500. Of course, the handshake part of the sales deal was what was important. I was still part owner, but not on paper. All good things in time. We got a good laugh out of the fact that 1 week at rehab costs $2,500. Sarah and the girls did not see me at the hospital again. They did come back a day after I relocated to the rehab facility, and as I understand it, were highly pissed off that they had not been notified. They were really pissed off when they came to rehab and were denied access. It seems that I was able to indicate who could and could not visit when I signed in. One of the orderlies let me know that they attempted to see me. My ribs hurt like hell when I laughed. The worst part of my injuries was dental work. Luckily, they had a dentist who was available to do on-site work at a cost. I opted to take advantage of it. The injury to my hand was not as bad as they originally thought. Although it was possible for me to get out of rehab a bit early, I decided to stay the full 2 weeks. After 10 days, I was able to breathe fully again. That felt good. Sarah never tried to visit again. The second weekend in February, the National CrossFit Expo was held in Atlantic City. Sarah and the girls attended with Terry Ulrich and the GE marketing team. Chuck and a few of our employees spent the weekend moving my clothing and stuff to the bungalow in Schuylkill County. He made sure to get my Marlin and all of my reloading supplies. 2 days later, I was comfortably settled in my new abode. That weekend, Chuck and his wife, June, came for a visit. It seems that Sarah has been to the office looking for me. There had been no bank deposits made to the joint account since the first of the year, and Sarah wanted an explanation. Chuck spent a half hour trying to explain to her that not only did I no longer own part of the company, but I also didn't even work there. In frustration, she stormed out threatening to see a lawyer. After a couple of weeks, I was functioning pretty well. The jaw situation was not nearly as bad as they originally thought, so I was back to normal eating and drinking in a couple of days. My dental problem was fixed, and I decided to leave my broken nose alone. I needed the small bit of character that it added. The other bruises and pains were healing normally. I did my therapy and exercised as directed. Chuck left me with one of the company trucks and a credit card. I also took a large amount of cash with me in case I needed it. I left my phone with Chuck. The bungalow was comfortable, but it was only temporary. I was doing a good bit of walking and started jogging at a leisurely pace. Terry Ulrich had a large house on Douai just outside of town. It was a long winding road going up Mount Penn. There were not a lot of homes there because it was difficult to build on the steep mountainside. The house was not hard to locate, and I was able to find several nice secluded vantage points. I would not be a quiet cuck. I spend my mornings exercising and getting fit. My afternoons were reserved for target practice. It was a good year for the groundhogs, but I gave them a pass and concentrated on inanimate targets. My Bushnell laser rangefinder indicated that I needed to be accurate at 133 yards. I would be ready when I could consistently take out an egg at that distance. I bought a lot of eggs. I bought a suppressor. I spend my evenings planning, adapting, and reloading. I limited myself to 1 black and tan a day. I started growing a beard. Chuck was coming up to see me every 2 weeks or so. Sarah had stopped by the office several times, still trying to locate me. After 2 months, she gave it up. Chuck always brought several newspaper clippings along. It appears that my wife and daughters were continuing to enjoy the high life with their new benefactor. He had to be completely supporting her by now because I was contributing nothing. Oddly, Sarah and the girls were still living in our old house, which I did not understand. It was time to move things along. I started driving back to the city early in the mornings so that I could pick out a good vantage point to observe Terry's house. Parking was a pain in the butt, so I ended up having to hike a bit. He was a creature of habit. I had never expected such a big guy to be a swimmer, but he did 50 laps every morning. Naturally, the pool was heated. That weekend, I made a trip to Potter County. Relocating from the bungalow to the cabin would be quite an adjustment. No electricity, no running water, and no cell phone signal. It was a 45-minute drive to the nearest Walmart in Olean, New York. I didn't want to make the drive in the wintertime, so I stocked up on everything I would need for the next 4 months at least. If I forgot anything or needed something that I hadn't thought of, I could get it before any bad weather closed me in. Early Wednesday morning, I drove to the office and moved all my items from the truck to my Subaru Outback. I parked the company truck at a construction site at the base of the mountain and hiked up to my selected vantage point. There was no other traffic at that time of the morning. I set up the tripod and installed the can. I had one in the chamber and one in the tube, with the next 2 ready. 20 minutes later, Terry Ulrich came out for his morning swim. The first shot shattered his right ankle. Even with the suppressor, it was loud that early in the morning. 2 seconds later, his left knee exploded. I loaded the next 2 rounds and took out his left elbow. My last designated target was his right wrist, which I could not get a bead on because of his erratic movements, so I gathered up my brass quickly and quietly left. 10 minutes later, I left the construction site and returned to the office and my waiting Subaru. I didn't go back to the bungalow but drove straight to Potter County. The first order of business was to clear out the spring so that I would have fresh water. Then I had to start getting together a good stockpile of firewood. Luckily, the cabin was watertight and well insulated. LED lanterns were a lot better and cheaper than the old coal oil lamps that were there. Soon things were fully under control and I started shooting again, paper targets this time. I first saw her in the middle of the second week. A tall, lanky woman dressed in jeans with a flannel shirt and vest. Although she was far away, I could see that she had a pack or something on her back. She passed by on the old logging trail that ran alongside the open area that was used for the shooting range. 640 acres, and I still had no privacy. Of course, it was far more practical to build the cabin near a road where materials could be brought in. The acreage was for the deer and occasional bear. One day, when I had a chance, I put the scope on her. She had a compound crossbow over her shoulder. I had no idea what she was doing with it, but I was interested. There was a small fire pit area at the range, so I started to bring an old galvanized coffee pot and biscuits with me. Yes, I made pretty good biscuits. I felt like I was setting some sort of trap. 3 days later, my trap worked. "Excuse me. My name is Claire. I was hoping that we could talk." She took me by surprise. Not being very socially adept, I sort of stammer a bit, and motioned for her to sit down. "Would you like some coffee? That was the best that I could do." She nodded, smiled, and slid the crossbow off of her shoulder before sitting down. "My name is Skip. I just got here about 2 weeks ago. I noticed you in the area several times. I am staying at the lodge about a mile down the road. I try and walk every day, and I usually end up in this area." I handed her one of my famous biscuits. "Are you staying here long?" "I'll be here for the rest of the summer." "Yourself, it's open. 4 or 5 months at least." She seemed to like my biscuit, but I got the feeling she would have preferred cream and sugar in the coffee. She didn't say anything, I just sort of picked up on it. Do you own this place? No, it belongs to a friend of mine, who lets me use it. We sat quietly for a few moments. Do you hunt? No, not really. I used to do a little varmint shooting, but I haven't done any for years. Just doing a little target shooting now. I don't want to be pushy, but would you mind if I used your range for a little practice? I haven't found any good places where I could use my bow. She had an accent that I could not place. It was either English, Australian, or Scottish. I didn't want to ask. No, not at all. I think we could find something suitable for a target backstop. Feel free to use it any time. She ate a second biscuit. I felt really good. I am just curious. I thought that most people were using compound bows now. You have a recurve bow and it looks new. Don't get me started. Just take my word for it, recurve is better. She used plain bolts for target shooting, but always carried 4 hunting shafts mounted on her bow. That evening, I drove down the road a few miles and picked up 3 hay bales. Thus started my summer with Claire Charles. Claire would arrive every day and return to her lodge every evening. The lodge staff had a tracker on her cell phone so that they knew where she was at all times. If Claire did not arrive back at the lodge, they would send someone out to locate her. It was an arrangement that she set up upon her arrival, and it seemed to work out very well. It was the start of our second week together when we were hit with a heavy summer squall. We huddled on the porch of the cabin laughing and joking about her dilemma. Without saying anything, she pulled out her phone and called the lodge. She informed them that due to the weather, she would be unable to return that evening and that she had found a comfortable place to stay for the night. I was both surprised and delighted. Thus, my platonic relationship with Claire Charles turned intimate. From there on, we would alternate our sleeping arrangements. The Highlands Lodge was totally out of place in Potter County. It was posh, very expensive, and was considered an upgrade from the Poconos. Most of their guests were from overseas. Claire's family was from Cornwall. The Highlands had hot showers, lavish meals, and laundry service which I took full advantage of. Sex in the wilderness is fun, but a lot more enjoyable when you have facilities. We were spending less time at the range. A couple of weeks later, while Claire and I were busy getting lunch together, Chuck and June arrived. June seemed especially pleased that I had a companion, and even more so when she figured out it was a full relationship. We kept things light for the first few hours, and then June and Claire wandered off to girl chat. Chuck thought it was funny that Claire liked her beer warm and I had to have mine cold. I had to make several trips out to the spring to get refills. After Terry Ulrich's tragic attack, I became the initial suspect. That turned out to be a bigger problem for Terry than he had imagined. The press wanted to know why I was the main interest. The more they looked into it, the worse things seemed to go for Terry and my wife. Although the main focus was to find me, the press quickly shifted to the relationship between Terry and my wife. 3 weeks later, Terry Ulrich was no longer the spokesperson for Gilbert Endeavors. The police had visited the bungalow in Schuylkill County and found it empty. They had no credit card leads, no phone call leads, and no idea whatsoever where I might be. They never asked Chuck about the cabin. Chuck mentioned that Sarah had come by the office several times trying in vain to find out where I was. She appeared to be a bit desperate, as her money source started to dry up. According to Chuck, it appeared that Terry had lost interest in her and was blaming her for his demise. I had no plan for my next step. I couldn't go back, and I had no other options that I wanted to explore. I was drifting at the moment. As we approached the end of the year, I found myself becoming complacent. I was happy and content with Claire, but I should have been paying attention to my real life. It was a brisk fall day, and I was alone at the cabin. Something was not right, but I could not figure out what it was. I just got the wood stove stoked back to normal and had the coffee started when the door suddenly burst open. Terry Ulrich was just as big and just as ugly as he was the last time I saw him. He stood in the open doorway with a big grin on his face and an old .38 police special in his right hand. He seemed to be standing unsteadily and held his left arm at an odd angle as if he were trying to balance himself. We just stood there, looking at each other. I was expecting some deeply meaningful words of vengeance, but nothing came. "Coffee?" I asked. Bastard. I spend over $10,000 to find you. No, I don't want any damn coffee. Well, what can I do for you? I know it was you, you sneaky little weasel. Your wife told me that you used to do a lot of target shooting. I hope you have 911 service up here, because you are going to need it. His face was getting all puffed up and red as he talked. He seemed to be working himself into a fury of some sort. All of a sudden he got a shocked expression on his face, dropped the gun, and fell to one knee. Terry Ulrich rolled over on the floor howling at the top of his lungs. About 12 inches of a crossbow bolt was sticking out of his left buttocks. The other 6 inches were buried deep and firm. Claire just stood in the doorway smiling. We ran most of the way back to the Highlands. I had taken nothing with me from the cabin. It took Claire about 15 minutes to get all of her stuff loaded in her rented Land Rover. We were laughing the whole time like a pair of high school kids. We finally calmed down to a fairly normal state when we reached US 80. Breakfast was calming and satisfying. I assume that he has removed the arrow and got to a facility for treatment by now. I don't think so. He has to call 911. I shot him with one of the hunting bolts, with a triple-bladed head. It has to be cut out. It cannot be pulled out. He will probably have to lay on his belly on the gurney when he goes to the emergency room. That has to be embarrassing. Well, Miss Claire, it looks like we are in big trouble now, and it is all your fault. She flicked a fork full of scrambled eggs at me and laughed. After breakfast, I made a call to Chuck, while Claire called someone else. I updated him on the situation, and he seemed to think that it was quite humorous. I told him that we were going to Ocala, Florida, where my grandparents lived. He snickered a bit because he knew I said that, just to cover his ass. While I was on the phone, Claire came over and took my wallet out of my pocket. She returned to her seat and continued her conversation while I shopped for goodies for our trip. What trip? I didn't know, but we had to go someplace. For some reason or another, I felt that Claire had a plan. She didn't tell me anything and I didn't ask. I was content in my ignorance and I trusted her. It was a long day. We finally stopped at a beautiful bed and breakfast in the Wisconsin Dells. We were beaten by the drive and just fell fast asleep. Breakfast was great, and 4 hours later, we were at the Walmart superstore in Duluth. Claire still had all of her stuff, but I left with nothing. I still had no idea what she had in mind, and she seemed to be having fun keeping me in the dark. I got a new wardrobe of sorts, and Claire got a big bag of snacks. Ever since I was a boy, I used to dream about taking a canoe trip to the Boundary Waters. I finally got to do it. Everything was arranged when we got there. The outfitter was even going to take care of Claire's rental car. That gave me a clue that we were probably not coming back. It was intriguing and exciting. I couldn't wait to see what else she had in store for me. Before we set out, I made one last call to Chuck. Skip, what in the hell did you do? It is all over the news here about Ulrich's latest demise. Some of the national services even picked it up. Gee, Chuck, I have no idea what you are talking about. I could hear June laughing in the background. Well, his media image is dropping like a lead balloon. It seems that he can't do anything right. Couldn't have happened to a nicer guy. I always wanted to say that. By the way, Skip, nice move on the divorce. Sarah was not expecting it, and it hit her hard. I don't know how you did it from up there, but it seemed to work. She has no idea what she is going to do and has no money to do it with. Chuck, believe me, I am not joking. I have no idea what the hell you are talking about. I never even went to see a lawyer. Are you sure about the divorce? Yeah, she was waving it in my face and ranting about it, just this morning. Well, it was nice to get some good news for a change. By the way, can you stop by the cabin and have somebody get my stuff and my car? The Marlin is still there. No problem. Where are you now? Moss Bluff, Florida. I am looking for a trailer I can rent. Claire was standing on the dock, waving me down. The canoe was loaded to the gills. I was thanking my parents for making me go to Boy Scout camp when I was younger. At least I didn't feel like a complete doofus. For the next 6 days, we paddled the lakes of the Boundary Waters. We had a different designated campsite each night. Claire knew where she was going and was using her cell phone GPS to get there. I was along for the ride and enjoying it. The best part of the trip was that she enjoyed sex under the stars. It was noon the next day when our adventure continued. We were met by a single man at a small dock on a remote road. Claire and he started hugging and talking French. After 30 minutes or so, he gave Claire the keys for the truck, along with a large envelope. We took our things out of the canoe and set off down the road. I looked in the rear window and saw him push off from the dock. I was driving and Claire started rooting through the envelope. I guess I better get used to calling you Clinton. Of course, I gave her a strange look. She did her little snicker kind of laugh and handed me a Canadian driver's license with my picture on it. The name on the license was Clinton Barfield. You're kidding, right? No, you are now Clinton Barfield, and you also have a new Canadian passport, she proudly waved in front of my face. Are we in Canada? Of course, silly. 4 days later we landed in Newquay. In 2 hours we were at Claire's family home just outside of St. Austell. It was as if I was born here. I felt comfortable and content. I was still very anxious about meeting Claire's family. The manor house was enormous. Her father asked me to join him in the den. On the far wall was an elaborate walnut gun cabinet. I watched with interest as he reached inside and removed a rifle. He handed it to me and smiled. It was my Marlin 336C chambered for the .219 zipper. I knew I was home.
That's the end of this story. If you found it engaging, please give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe for more content like this.